Hi, everybody. Welcome to Art School Live. I'm 𝘿𝙚𝙢𝙧𝙚. I'll be guest hosting the show while Eric's out of town. I'm thrilled to have one of my favorite artists joining us today, Dylan Cole. Dylan has been nominated for an Academy Award for his artwork and production design on the film Avatar: The Way of Water, and you can see his artwork in numerous films. He's also one of us. He's a great plein air landscape painter. Welcome, Dylan. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're really excited about this. What are you going to be doing for us today?
I'm going to talk about kind of designing your plein air work with atmospheric perspective in mind, where it just becomes basically a value study, and also just not to be a slave to your reference. You know, it's so often where you just feel like you have to copy exactly what you see in front of you, but ultimately you have to remember you're making a piece of art, you're making a painting, you're trying to say something. So I'm going to kind of combine thoughts from kind of both sides of my world of the sort of the concept art side, where it's fully creation, and then plein air side, where it's observation. And so I'm going to sort of do an extreme example of how to change something from the reference, just to empower you when you are out doing plein air paintings, that it's okay to change stuff. It's okay to experiment.
Good. I can't wait to see this, because I'm really curious about how you take some of those creative liberties that you take.
Thank you. Yeah, it should be fun. I'm going to sort of kind of marry in a little bit of Avatar and sort of do a little bit of Pandoran plein air, if you will.
Awesome. I can't wait to see it. Well, let's take a look at a couple of your paintings while you're getting set up. So we're going to see some of the artwork that Dylan has done for films, like this one, as well, and this one, just gorgeous, as well as some of his plein air work. And you've all seen his work in different movies over the years. And this is some of the work that he does with his easel and his paints, just out there in the elements, like the rest of us. And I'm curious to hear about how your plein air work has affected your film artwork, and vice versa, how the way that you look at things when you're designing art for films affects your plein air work when you're out there in the elements.
Yeah, it's all about economy and being decisive. I think the problem with digital is you can change things too much. You know, and so you know, you definitely try and be a little more decisive. It's also has to do a lot with shape making. You know, I've done thousands of digital paintings, so that's sort of helped my shape making a bit in the plein air world. Now, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to do a very quick drawing. Now, this might be funny when you see the reference, because basically all I'm using the reference for it's some stuff from China, from 𝘼𝙤𝙢𝙦, where I'm basically just going to take some of the colors, some of the forms, and I'm going to kind of just make up my own thing. So I'm going to do a very quick drawing, but I'm going to be kind of just pushing and pulling paint a bit to kind of define the composition. So I do like that kind of foreground thing on the left, but I'm going to lower the horizon, and I'm going to try and just kind of, I'm just very quickly doing a very loose sketch of just kind of like, hey, this goes there, that goes there.
So here we can all see the reference photo on the lower right. So we see what you're working with. I've noticed that you've done that sometimes when you're outside painting plein air, you use a limited palette. Are you using a limited palette now?
I am. I kind of got it from the Scott Christensen school, where it's just the titanium white, cad yellow, light, cad red light, and ultramarine. And I'll occasionally add like a yellow ochre or like a red oxide, just to make browns a little quicker.
Mm-hmm.
But then, yeah, and so that's it. I find it kind of has instant color harmony.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, it's kind of hard when all the colors are mixed together. It's kind of hard to have something be completely out of key or you know, out of the right color structure. But so I'm just kind of sketching. This big blob's going to be a big floating mountain. But what I'm going to do is key off of the information in the photo about how to make it look realistic. And so I'm just going to paint some very simple planes of kind of foreground, middle ground, background. Put something big and fun up in the sky. And I'm just doing a very, you know, my drawings are very loose. It's just kind of like, okay, I want this there, that there. And I'm just going to repeat a couple sort of shapes to show distance. And like, this is probably looks like absolutely nothing. But I kind of know what I'm blocking in. But I'm going to do a quick little tiny bit of a wash to show like, okay, this can be a foreground shape. Probably another one down there. And then this big shape's going to be sort of my midground.
So the subject matter on this may wind up being what we would term fantasy, but I think that you're doing what a lot of us do when we go out and paint plein air, which is we take the real world and we make it our own.
Yeah, exactly. And it took me a while to kind of understand, like, even though, I create, fictional worlds for a living, it took me a while to kind of say it's okay to break out and change something plein air. It was like a different part of my brain had to engage, or actually had to turn it off. Or like, wait, no, you create stuff all the time. So, why is this hard to invent plein air? Because I think you're so focused, you're fighting the elements, you're fighting the paint, you're fighting just your subject matter and the light and everything. So it's real hard to forget that, oh, it's okay to invent. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start blocking in just the sky, just to kind of create some basic shapes. You can see I'm working on a toned canvas. I kind of hate the white of the canvas. It also helps you, I think, see some true color. All I'm doing is just a little titanium white and ultramarine blue, just kind of muted a little bit with some of the yellow and red, but just a tiny bit. So I'm just doing a very basic kind of, as you can see in the reference photo, kind of hazy background.
Is the way that you work usually, unless there's some other reason, to work from back to front?
Yeah, I kind of come from the old matte painting, visual effects school, where it's like everything keys off the sky. I know there's a lot of artists that do the sky last because, and I get the reasoning for it, is because you don't want to key your painting too dark. And so I think as long as you're disciplined with the sky color, you can still start back to front. But because I think all the colors relate to the sky. So I mean, in plein air painting, that's what everything is keying off of. So to me, it never made a lot of sense to wait until the end to do it. I've done it, and I do it occasionally, but I find it a little counterintuitive to me, just because, like, for 20 some odd years, I've been starting with the sky in all my paintings.
Right.
So, and again, I don't mind that some of this warmth underneath is coming through. It'll help with the color vibration, and it's going to be a bit of a, kind of cooler painting to begin with. And so I am totally fine with this mixing that's happening.
Now, I know that a lot of our viewers will know what you mean when you say aerial perspective, but can you give us a really quick rundown on it for those who may not?
Aerial perspective is basically haze, and it's how light changes and light and value changes as things recede. So instead of linear perspective, which is like looking down a street where you see the buildings recede, you see value recede, where typically it gets lighter, and in a clear blue day, blue sky day, it often gets or clear sunny day, I should say, it gets cooler. And so what I'm doing here is I'm paying attention, as you can see in the reference photo, that distant mountain range, which is what I'm about to start painting right now, is very light and very blue. So I've added a bit more ultramarine blue and a bit more of the cad yellow and tiny bit of cad red. Again, I don't want these super saturated colors, trying to have a bit of muted palette in here so that I can have somewhere to go, because once you start fully saturated, then there's kind of nowhere left to go. So again, I am blocking these shapes in as much as I can. It's going to be sort of like a distant floating mountain peeking up above. I'm going to do sort of like a distant range here. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll kind of pop back and forth between foreground and background. I'm also kind of checking my color relationships. It's like, okay, is that blue working? I'm basically just doing kind of 4 values for right now. It's good to start as simple as you can with values, so you can kind of create a strong composition, and then you can go in and mess with it from there. But just for the readability of it, you want to start with sort of as few values as possible, just so you can lock in your composition. So obviously it looks like a mess right now, but I'm just kind of trying to get a few colors down so I can figure out my relationships. So it's a little confusing what I'm doing now, these like floating balls, and they're like, wait, what are you doing? That's not a landscape. But I'm going to paint a more traditional mountain ridge down here. And then, you sell the realism with the familiar elements. And then as long as your colors are working, you can then experiment with adding different shapes. As long as your color's accurate, then you'll believe it.
That makes perfect sense. So when you're out painting plein air, do you do thumbnails before you get started?
You know what? I should, but I never do. It's one of those things I just never do. I probably should, but I kind of like the excitement of having to solve it while I'm doing it. if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
And yeah, because it's like once I've solved it, it's like, okay, well then it's kind of becomes a paint by numbers and less exciting.
Yeah.
And so again, I know it's a little odd looking, but let me block in a darker shape so we can kind of start to establish foreground, then we'll move back to the midground. And I'm just focused on just a few large shapes. I'm repeating shapes. This big shape is gonna be floating mountain, so I know that the smaller shape is the same thing at distance. When you're establishing scale, it's good to key off of things and repeat elements so that you see, like, for example, a foreground tree, you see a similar tree shape in the distance. So that tells you, in addition to the haze and the aerial perspective, you have a scale cue to help you as well.
That's very helpful. So it's not just trying to record exactly what you see in front of you, but also trying to make sense of it.
Absolutely. It's all about organization. There's just way too much detail in in nature, so you have to pick and choose. So I mean, like, whether you intend to or not, you're still designing while you're doing it. But I guess this is my extreme example of showing how much you can design and just kind of take what's in front of you as inspiration. So in this sort of foreground shadow color, I'm sort of ignoring the rock color for now. I'm just trying to establish values with 4 basic values. So I'm basically painting the shadows of the greenery and ignoring the rock, and just trying to rough in some shapes, figure out a composition and balance. You want nothing symmetrical. I lowered my horizon from the reference photo. Just kind of a lot of the basic compositional rules. I'm not trying anything overly, controversial here. It's just kind of very, very kind of a simple, balanced, hopefully, composition. We'll see what I do. I'm just kind of blobbing in a tree top here. I'm trying to move quickly, so I'm not like scraping out painting before I go over. So I'm going to be frosting a cake a little bit with gobbing on the painting.
So when we're talking about composition, are there any quick suggestions you can give to artists who are really working on improving their composition and developing their own sense of composition?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the I tend to do a lot of the classic stuff where it's rule of thirds, and don't put any focal point in the center. Like, it's why my horizon is not dead center. I lower the horizon so I have the opportunity to look up and see more of these floating mountains. Your eye goes naturally to the point of highest contrast, and so keep that in mind. So I know that our eye is going to pop to this foreground spire with a tree on it, and from there it'll probably go over this mountain, but I'm just going to continue blobbing in the color, and then I'm going to adjust as I go, because I kind of want a path in, which will probably be this spire and tree, but I'm going to make sure the lines of the tree kind of point me up to this other floating mountain, and it's going to kind of create hopefully a pleasing circular path that'll kind of keep you in the painting.
Okay. And so you're really kind of methodically blocking this thing in.
Yeah, I mean, I have a rough idea of, like, okay, there's gonna be some floating mountains here, but then I'm gonna for sure just change and adjust. You kind of have to get some paint down to figure this out. And then, what probably the easier thing to do would be to block in the bottom first, so you sort of see the more traditional landscape, and then, kind of figure out how we can introduce the fantasy elements. But it's funny, I've been working on Avatar so long, the floating mountains seem normal to me. So, but again, it's all these same principles completely apply to whether it's desert, mountains, pure realism, fantasy, anything. It's all kind of basic, standard techniques and thinking that applies across everything.
Right.
All right, I know I got this big hole in the right. Let me just try and cover that real quick.
Okay, now how are you going to paint the bottom of that? Because that doesn't exist, and we don't know what that looks like. So how are you going to make something up out of literally thin air?
Well, I'm going to probably fuzz the edges and apply some vines and growth hanging off down there. But the main thing I'm thinking about is just a balance of shapes. I don't want anything symmetrical. I want variety to my shapes. I don't want to mirror. It's very easy to sort of do inverted kind of mountain shapes. I don't want any shapes parallel, so I'm going to be paying attention to this area to make sure that kind of hole works. And you know, it's going to be those areas that I will adjust a lot.
So I think a lot of the artists watching are probably interested in taking a plein air painting and all of the experience and everything that they've learned from doing that painting. And then maybe in their studio, they go, oh, you know what? The composition might be more interesting if I had a building on the left or a car.
Yeah.
Can you talk for a sec about adding something that's not present to a painting? I mean, in this case, you're doing the floating mountain. Will you find reference images of vines descending and however, whatever you imagine to be on the underside of that? Or will you draw upon your personal experience painting those type of things? Talk us through how to add elements to paintings that you might have done outside.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's always good to start with reference so that you have some, you know, comfort factor, but it depends, you know, sometimes it's drawing on what's already there. So you just look at like, oh, there's a tree, I'm going to move that tree, or I'm going to take the shape of that and exaggerate it. So it really depends how much of a thing you're adding. But if you're adding something totally fictional, then I highly recommend getting some reference so that you know, have a decent idea. And the main thing is keying off the accurate lighting, you know, so either be confident enough in your understanding of the light to sort of fake it, or, you know, try and have the reference with similar lighting.
So if the light's coming from behind, like in this one, don't find a house that's front lit in the sun and stick it on top of the mountain.
But if you're confident with the lighting, you can take the architectural details of that house and kind of go from there.
Right.
So now I'm very, very nasty putting in this foreground thing. Now I don't want a big square in my corner, so I'm going to carve back into that with the sky color in a sec. But now at least the canvas is sort of covered, and so now we can start to adjust basic composition stuff. And then what's fun is then just what I love about the 3/4 backlight is it's basically a value study, but then you get to sweeten it with some highlights later. So that's some of my favorite stuff. So I'm going to go back into the sky color. Actually, what am I doing? I'm going to do the background mountains. And just play around here for a second and finesse a few shapes, clean up a couple edges. And then, you know, just imply, again, just with a little bit of slight downstrokes to some of those hanging vines and stuff. I'm also going to briefly carve into sort of this tree shape here.
Somebody is asking, Neil is asking if you're using any solvents or medium, or is it just straight paint?
Paint and just Gamsol.
Okay. You're thinning it down a little bit with Gamsol?
Yeah, just to help it flow a little bit, but I tend to be pretty simple. I don't mess a lot with the mediums. I'm always curious because like some people swear by it. It's like, oh, okay, I gotta learn more about that.
Yeah, there's so much to learn about everything. I noticed that often I'll notice that students kind of miss the opportunity to overlap things. Can you talk really quickly about overlapping as a way to create depth?
Thank you very much. That's absolutely very important. So, you know, I intentionally have none of these shapes isolated, you know, like they're all in front of one another or behind. And so it creates depth. Like you can't help but know that this spire is in front of that mountain. So that's why I'm putting this darker one in front of that, have the floating one behind it. So yes, absolutely stacking is key to selling this sort of illusion.
It's very effective already. I mean, it already makes perfect spatial sense.
Yeah, and so I'm just going to kind of continue blobbing in some shapes here. All right, I think I'm going to grab my sky color, start carving into this. Some of those mountains a little bit, just try and figure out my shapes. So I'm just trying not to repeat shapes. And let's see here, which is easier said than done. I don't want that line right there. I want that curving back. The reason I'm angling that is that I want your eye to be angled in to the painting. I probably should have scraped that off, but I'm just going to kind of mash it in here.
Looks good to me.
I just want to carve into the shape a little bit negative.
So obviously
shape.
The tendency for beginners is to sort of paint one thing and then paint the other thing, but you're going back and forth from foreground to back.
Yeah, that's sort of the key. It's like I kind of talk, you know, it's same with digital. I kind of joke, I paint in a state of panic until everything's kind of covered, and then you can like start to make adjustments. But it's like, you know, you just gotta kind of fight through the ugly phase as you're figuring stuff out. And then now I don't want this parallel swoop down here. So I'll probably add a bulge under those mountains, and then I'll go back and adjust the background. You don't want parallel lines back there.
Right. The ugly face. Yeah, I like that. For some of us, that lasts longer than others. So.
Well, yeah, no, exactly. And then sometimes it's only at the very end you kind of rescue it. You're like, oh God, there's something here. But yeah, so I'm gonna what am I doing now? I'm gonna go back to this background color a little bit. It really helps to kind of, as you're going, just mix large piles. So especially something like this, where you're bouncing back and forth between different layers, so you don't have to mix that color every single time. Definitely mix some larger piles of it.
That makes sense. I definitely see students being really skimpy with the amount of paint they're using. And yeah, if you can have
I know it's so hard. It feels so bad to, like, squeeze out that giant pile of paint, but oh man, you got to do it. And then I just want to, again, make sure these shapes aren't parallel and are kind of accenting each other. All right, and then let's see. I'm gonna go back to that sky color in a second.
So, Dylan, I would have my host license revoked if I didn't ask you, what have you learned about art and creativity and working on really ambitious projects from James Cameron? And this could be a simple answer because your mind is occupied with something important right now, but I think that some of the viewers would probably love to hear it, and I know I would. Or we can talk about it at the very end if you'd rather do that.
No, what I've learned so much is about design, is about smart design. I mean, the beauty of working with James Cameron is he is such a smart and talented designer himself that he makes you better and demands you to be better, because so much of what, happens in film is just like, oh, I thought that looked cool. And you're like, okay, well, and, what else? And so, and I'm guilty of that as anybody. And so, it's so easy just to kind of fall in love with a fun shape or a cool idea. But, in the world of Avatar, it has to be justified. It has to be, we joke it's kind of science fact, not science fiction, even though there are floating mountains and all that. But that's sort of the thinking is it's all about the whys. And, sometimes you come up with a cool shape and you got to justify it later, so it still is a bit of that. But it's trying to be smarter and just think more about what you're doing. And so I'm going to imply some of these vines.
Jerry is asking if you always paint with a small brush.
No, I mean, I like a medium brush. I like kind of medium flats. Mm-hmm. This is like a 6. I should have probably started with a little bigger than this, but I'm just kind of in go mode now where I'm just, just trying to cover. And so I don't switch things up as much as I probably should. But
I always laugh when I hear an artist who is doing something that is clearly working. And I hear this all the time when I hear an artist that's doing something that's clearly working go, oh, I should do it that way. Or yeah, I guess I should do it that way. We all have the ways that we work. But it's helpful to know about materials.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, there's experimentation to be done. A lot of times I do that at the end when I'm just trying to like, okay, slow down, look at finishing strokes. What effects am I trying to get? I think that's kind of when I will vary the marks up and the tools. Mm-hmm. It's certainly a better idea to do it earlier because then you, if you have to walk away, then at least your marks are varied, and interesting instead of all being the same thing. But one of the reasons I love these, it's big flats is the variety. I can use the edge of it. I can, use the flat part. I can scrub, I can push, I can pull, they have a lot of variety to them.
I love those myself. It's funny you said if you have to walk away. I mean, that's the thing when you're painting plein air, right? The cops might show up at any time and throw you out, or there may be a tornado. I mean, you have to be ready to call it at any point. Catherine is asking what size your canvas is.
This is 11 by 14.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I sort of have stuff roughed in. I'm not entirely happy with the big shape kind of behind here. Let's see here.
It's great to hear you say that, because finding natural shapes is something that I certainly struggle with, and that I see a lot of artists struggling with. And the notion that that's kind of a negotiation that you have going on throughout the painting
Always.
is always, huh? Good.
Yeah, no, and I mean, yeah, I've painted this type of stuff before. So yeah, I mean, I have certain things in my, library in my brain, but it's ultimately like, it's not just the individual shapes, it's how they all relate to one another. And so there's kind of no shortcut, and you just kind of have to fight your way through it. And then one thing that I was just starting to mess around with is, like, now you have these 4 basic planes, then you can start to tell a little bit more of a depth story, where it's like, okay, I'm going to take that foreground color and I'm going to say down here, maybe it starts to recede, and I'm just letting it mix right in, where I can now tell the story of this kind of range receding a little bit back.
Just
and
those quick strokes really connected one with the other and really showed so much more depth.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to do it again on this this plane. And so this is kind of what I mean with, like, designing with atmospheric perspective, where it's like, okay, you don't want just to look like cards in space. You're trying to create 3D depth, right? So I'm going to let this fade back there. And the other reason to do it on the edge, it's kind of losing an edge, which takes my eye back to the middle. I'm also seeing this mirrored shape right here, these 2 mountains, which thank goodness I caught. I would have kicked myself later.
I'm always looking for those man-made elements. We make things look man-made because we're human beings, and I find that we have to sort of fight to find those areas.
Yes, exactly. And you just don't realize it's something that takes a fresh pair of eyes, where you're like, okay, and then it's always another artist that points it out. You're like, oh, you decided to do that. You're like, no, I didn't.
So how do you check yourself? Do you use a mirror, or do you turn it upside down? What do you do?
You probably see my silly setup here with the mirrors. And when I work at my computer, I can, I always look back and check it. Mirrors are great because they not only flip it, they also give you some distance. So I love that.
Right.
So I'm just going to go back and refine. So I kind of have this little ridge down here. So I'm going to very quickly apply some tree shapes that are smaller than that, so that gives me a repeating shape that is telling me that there's some distance here.
Yeah, you were talking about that before. That's a great effect.
Now, again, I don't mind the warm ground and the warm kind of drawing peeking through. It kind of creates a little color vibration and much needed warmth. I mean, I try and get the big egregious areas, but I'm not hell-bent on getting rid of every single bit of it.
So it looks like the value in the foreground is, call it a 7 out of 10, if 10 is the darkest.
Yes.
Are you planning to go in there and make smaller areas in there darker?
I'll probably do a little dark accent, but given that it is a large landscape, part of that is a tool to create the depth, where even the foreground isn't in my face. It's still at a distance.
It really creates a sense of depth and of sort of grand, imposing depth to have the closest thing to us still pretty far away.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something I use a lot in my digital work, where as long as you have the correct relationships of things, stacking correctly, you can get away with that. And it's, you don't realize something will naturally feel smaller if it has deep blacks, because you just assume it's very close to you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm just doing a little fussing before I'm going to start adding some highlights. Just playing around with some of these edges and shapes a little bit. All right, now let's have some fun with some highlights. Actually, before I even do that, I'm going to imply some of the rock shapes.
Oh, great. I think people will be excited to see this.
It's going to be a few blobby brush strokes, but all I'm looking like, this is where I will absolutely key off the reference photo. Most of this time I haven't been looking at it because I kind of rough idea of where the colors were going. But now that I'm looking at it, I'm trying to figure out the relationships. I'm going to put some rock in this foreground and probably that big midground one. So all I'm doing is looking at the relationship. It's a little lighter and it's a little warmer. And that's kind of all I care about. You know, instead of, it's all about how things are relative to the color, not being 100% accurate. Like a painting can feel 100% real and the colors can be totally wrong, but as long as it has an internal harmony and internal logic, that's all that matters. So I'm keying off the color I have. I'm making it a little lighter, a little warmer. And I actually learned from a good friend of mine, John Burton, that it's just, you know, it's value and temperature, just warmer, cooler, lighter, darker. If those questions are much easier to answer than exactly what a color is.
Mm-hmm. That I think will be very helpful for people. And now
so I'm just kind of looking here. And again, I'm just trying to come up with some shapes that might imply some of this rock work.
That might be the takeaway of the day for some people who are listening is if you can find one color based on the previous color and just say, is it lighter or darker? Is it warmer or cooler? Then there are tons and tons of colors that one could actually use in there that will work. Is that what you'd say?
That is 100% correct. And I think it'll allow you to be a little more inventive with your painting because then you're less of a slave to what's in front of you where you feel you have to match it exactly. Like, no, as long as I you know, follow these principles, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big one.
Now, I don't like how light that side is. So I'm just going to block in. And the main thing, just come up with some very clear, simple shapes. You know, I'm not trying to paint any of this stuff exactly. I'm just taking some of the information that's there. And I'm going to always kind of take a step back. I feel like I might want to warm it up a tiny bit. And here's the thing, as you're finding the color, that's okay because there's a ton of variety in the color of these rocks. So I just warmed it up and I'm not going to completely repaint it. I'm just going to put some warmth here and there. And then the color variety of me trying to figure it out will look like I was intentionally given all this color richness. And it's really me just trying to find the right color. But
I think that is a great point, that you're effectively painting with broken color, but not necessarily on purpose. It's just trying to find the color that is in front of you and the multicolored, I mean, the thousands of colors that are just present in that little rock.
Yep, exactly. All right, so that's a decent start to that. But just so I can repeat this, I'm going to establish some of the rock value in the midground. And then we just kind of check all those relationships together. So I'm kind of taking that color that I had established for that midground, a little lighter, a little warmer. Let's see what I got here. Oh,
when I was really first trying to learn how to paint landscapes, I was just spellbound by the way anyone who could effectively paint rocks and clouds and trees and anything natural, but especially Frederick Church and Bierstadt and those guys, how they would paint the kind of rhythm of nature. How did you find how did you get to the point where you could communicate the rhythm of nature in a way that was believable and that didn't feel man-made, but that was you know, where you could do it relatively fast when you're out there painting?
Yeah,
other than just doing it.
Yeah, I was going to say the answer is I don't know that I do. You know, is that every single time it's a challenge, and you know it's like I think all I can say is I have the experience to be critical where I may not get it first try, but I'm not satisfied until I feel it's kind of working. And so I think that's the main thing is having seen enough of it to know to keep at it and not just give up on it. You know, it's all about variety. And so, you know, I'm trying to look at shapes that meander. I'm trying not to follow the, you know, contours of the top of the mountain. So again, I'm not trying to mirror it, trying to accent it. I also know that the way these formations tend to grow, obviously not not floating, but like, let's say the top half of that in an area like 𝚤𝙚 or something like that, is that they tend to be covered more on the tops with the trees and foliage and bushes. And so I'm, sticking the rock work to the side, and to not be fussy with it, to, kind of do larger shapes. And again, all about variety. It's going to be a broken record, word of the day.
No, it's so helpful because it's so, I find it so difficult not to just paint the same shape over and over and over again.
Yeah, and then I'll find that I do, but the key is to try and look with the critical eye and, fix it.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, like, it doesn't mean it right out of the gate it's fine. It's like I repeat shapes, I have my cliches, and it's about fighting them. And it's okay to be, I'm just kind of loose here, and I think the color variety and the sort of broken edges, starting to lend a bit of realism here.
Absolutely, it reads really well. By the way, you've got about 15 minutes.
Okay, great. Well, then I'm gonna finish this phase up and start popping in some highlights, which is the sort of the dessert after. This is all just eating our vegetables. Now we get to the dessert. So.
That's right. We have to work our way up to the fun stuff, right?
Exactly. You got to earn it. All right. So I'm going to try a little bit of rock color in those sort of background mountain shapes. Real quick. Now, that value change, because of the atmospheric perspective in the haze, gets less and less and less as you recede. So I got to be a little bit more careful here. And this might be a little bit more testing. So I just want to, that's not bad.
So as the lights and the shadows are getting farther and farther away, the values of them are getting closer and closer together.
Correct. Absolutely. So I'm just kind of trying to get that color in there, and just need to blob in a couple shapes just to sell the illusion without overdoing it. You find that like once you add that like secondary color, and it kind of becomes basically just a two-tone thing, right? You have like a green and a rock, then it instantly sells it instead of it just being a shape.
Right. All of a sudden it has dimension.
Yeah.
Now, how, if at all, are you varying that rock color, that gray color of the rocks, as it gets farther away from us? Are you just putting the same color down on a lighter bluer color so there's less contrast, or have you shifted it a little bit?
With this background, I'm just going right into my pile of background color, and I was adding a little bit of white and a little bit of red, and that's it.
Okay.
Again, it's all relative, so it's just warmer, lighter. Go back to those temperature relationships. And so again, I'm not going to be overly careful or precious. I should probably make this a little thicker so I can be a little more precise or have more clear delineation instead of mixing so much in there. Again, pardon my face if you see me coming across here.
Everybody's captivated by the painting. They're not paying attention.
Okay, good. So that's a good little implication. Now this is going to hopefully start to pop a little bit more when I start adding some highlights. So again, everything's relative. So with these highlights, I'm going to start in the foreground because that'll be my most saturated, and then start to desaturate as I move back. Now, in looking at the reference photo, again, it's not bright yellow green. I'm going to take that color and I'm going to lighten it up with mainly cad yellow and titanium white, a little bit of red to warm it up.
Is that direct sunlight?
Yes, this would be the direct sunlight highlight. As you can see, it's a hazy photo, so it's it's probably being filtered a bit through some haze, but yes, I would call it direct sunlight.
Okay.
And our light is probably right up here behind this mountain, so because I really want to edge light this floating mountain. So this one in the foreground is definitely going to be a little bit more rim lit. So I'm just going to very quickly touch in some highlights on those trees.
That really pops those trees out, putting those highlights on them.
Yeah, yep. And so that to me looks a hair cool, little minty. I'm gonna warm that up just a little bit. And again, kind of same thing with the rocks. My color variation is going to be supportive because it's just going to look like whether it's different species of trees or bushes or whatever will help me imply some stuff. Now, again, I'm not going super high contrast here because I want this to feel expansive. So I'm just barely hinting at some stuff.
So a couple of people, I think, may have joined us a few minutes late. They're asking if you're going to connect the ground on the bottom with the ground on the top. Dylan created the artwork for the film Avatar and a lot of other films, and he is also an avid plein air landscape painter. And he's sort of combining both approaches to show us how to paint a plein air painting, but to add one's own elements to it. So those will not be connected for anybody who is confused about what's happening.
Yeah, what is this crazy person doing? Why is he on this show? Yes, that is correct. So I'm just dotting around, just kind of increasing saturation a little bit. I might go back in and adjust this as I start to move the highlights to the back. And then in this area where I sort of was blending and showing some depth of that ridge, I'm kind of doing the same with the highlights. Mm-hmm. Very, very simple shapes and ideas here.
This really helps paintings not look flat. It's really when we're all first starting to paint, it's really hard not to make a painting look flat. And I remember, I think it was my teacher in high school looking at a painting of mine of a person and saying he doesn't look like he has a back. And I thought, well, I'm painting him from the front. How is he supposed to have a back? But getting form to turn can be a challenge, and this is a great way of doing it.
Absolutely. And you know, what's nice that you can still do all the value tricks for establishing composition, which is, I think, a much easier way to do it. I do the same thing digitally, and then you just add some edge highlights, and you know, that's why I love doing backlit stuff. All right, let's test this highlight color in this mountain. Not bad. I'm gonna warm it up a little bit. Lighten it just a little bit. You know, and you have to account for it mixing into the color beneath it.
Is classical Chinese art and Asian art something that you've spent much time with?
Not really. It's more about the landscapes. I mean, like I love looking at some of that art to see how they simplified it and interpreted it, but ultimately it's more just about the landscape itself than the art. Not take anything away from the beautiful art, but it's just what was not particularly formative for this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, this is really coming together. It's really got three-dimensionality.
So now what I don't want are these two similar mounds. Those are the type of things I look at. So probably gonna maybe say there's some more light over here, so it's not the same. And then I might change that a little bit. Might also add an intermediary little bump here just to break it up, and then I still have a little bit of that pile, so I can kind of carve back in. I don't have a little bit of that pile. Let me mix a little bit more. Let's say there's maybe some little ridge going back there. All right, now let me put some of that highlight on the bottom portion. And again, it's just touches. Like I'm not trying to overly render this thing. It's just, you know, little pools of light. You know, it's like, where do you want your eye to dance around to? And it's not all just edge lighting. What's nice to do is to, yeah, you start there, but then you're like, okay, there's a plane that comes in, maybe catches some more light down here.
Right. All of a sudden, that one flat area now has great dimension, and we can feel the way it turns and comes forward.
I'm just going to let it kind of dance around and get a little lost in the background there. You know, it's really easy to sort of lose edges, and then you kind of come back and reinforce it and figure out where you want your eye to go. I'm just very quickly putting some.
So someone is asking, do you use software to create these landscapes and movies or use these oil paintings and stitch them together? Maybe you can give all of us oil painters just a really quick rundown on your process when creating artwork for films.
Yeah, no, I do. I use Photoshop primarily for my digital painting. Sometimes also work in 3D and do like a 3D base. But for my painting, I just use Photoshop. And I very much just do this sort of thing where I'll just block in very simple shapes. For those with a little bit of digital knowledge, I'll do just like a lasso tool, just flat color. So I don't get like distracted by, you know, brush or texture or anything like that. It's like, no, it's just flat color so I can figure out my values.
The same way you did it here.
Exactly. So I work very, very similarly.
That's really helpful to know.
Yeah, no, I do that. I'm starting to put in some of this background highlight color. It's looking a little cool to me. But so then I basically figure out my big shapes, and then I'll start to, with a combination, oftentimes I'll use photos for textures and detail, just because stuff, you know, film is on such a tight schedule. You know, we have to be as economical as we can, working quickly. And so I will, yeah, oftentimes for realistic textures, bash in photos, and then manipulate them to work with my painting. The key is to not be a slave to those photos. You know, it's still your painting. You're in charge of it.
Right.
And it's very seductive to get kind of lost in the photo and to let it kind of overtake what you're doing. But it's very important to still do what you want. I'm going to put a bigger pool of light down here. So again, it's almost a temperature hue change than it is a major value change on those background highlights. I kind of killed this edge a little bit, so I'll clean that up. And then I think just so there's a little bit more fun and focal point. And
Dylan, we have about 4 more minutes. I was going to tell you 5, but I got captivated by your painting.
See me butcher this with trying to put in a little waterfall. Do like
excellent.
Our fantasy floating mountain waterfall thing coming off this guy.
That's great news.
This will be where I ruin the painting. So I'm kind of going to take kind of the background color, a little bit of blue, because like most of it's going to be in the shadow, so it's going to be reflecting the sky tone. I'm going to, again, I should be using a little round brush for this. Probably I'm not. I'm just using the edge of my flat.
So for the rest of us, so what you're saying is you're not afraid to get in there and possibly ruin a painting.
Oh, you kind of have to. At least if I crash and burn here, we can all see what's happening and learn from it. So
that is very helpful.
I want it to be centered. So I want something probably coming down here-ish.
I hope everybody got that. He's not afraid to get in there and take something that's really working and possibly ruin it to try something, to try and experiment and try to take it farther. I think that's helpful for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a painting. You can do it again. See my arm shaking with too much coffee this morning. Let's go here. There we go. I just went a little boop.
And why are you putting the waterfall there? It could be anywhere in the painting.
Well, I want to help lead our eye here. I don't want it dead center, but I want it coming off here. And then I'm going to let this just kind of blend in a little bit. I'm just going to use my finger to smudge. Now, what I might, if I'm feeling really brave here, I might say that this is backlit, and most of this is in shadow, but maybe the bottom's catching a little bit of light, and we might have ourselves a fun little focal point here. Going back to the Hudson River School stuff you're talking about. Those guys love to dramatically light.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff like Waterfall. So I'm going to just take some titanium white, little bit of CAD, yellow and red, tiny bit just to warm it up. And just going to try and have some light hitting down here, which will actually kind of break the light of the sky composition. So we're basically kind of doing a little bit of counter change. All right, now that looks very strange, but if I blend it a little bit, good old finger, right?
Good old finger painting.
And do a little more. And it's hard because it's like, as it's being backlit, it's also kind of dissolving into air, right? So I'm just going to very lightly sort of take my brush and vary up the strokes to kind of blend it out a little bit. Now, because when I was finger painting, I was taking off a little too much of it, but something like that's starting to get there. And then, you talk about layering.
Okay, give us 1 more minute, and and then we'll call it.
Sure. And then what I'm going to do, final step, is I'm going to try and establish a little bit of depth with that waterfall so we can see where that is disappearing to. So I'm going to take this ridge, I'm going to take some of that shadow color, and I'm just going to carve into that waterfall shape so that we establish that it is falling behind that ridge.
Oh, this is great. This is great. I love it.
And then we can take some of that dark color and just, kind of just let some of this detail dance around here. Maybe there's another little hint of a tree down there. Just implication of detail, just a few little dots.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed watching you do this today. And everyone is leaving comments that they're really enjoying it and getting a lot out of it. So thank you so much. This is just great. I've really enjoyed this, and I know that everybody else has. So thank you, Dylan.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, it's absolutely my pleasure, and having a lot of fun here, and hopefully it was somewhat useful.
I think it was really useful. Let me make a couple announcements, and then I'll ask you to come back on screen and talk for 1 sec. So I really enjoyed that. I have a gift for you, everybody. You can download the free ebook, 201 Essential Plein Air Painting Tips. Go to outdoorpainter.com/ebook. Everybody, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, Art School Live on YouTube, and to follow Eric Rhodes on Instagram. Eric does so much to just spread knowledge and help all of us out. And he's got a great Instagram account. You can see more of Dylan's work at 𝘿𝙚𝙘𝙧𝙚 and follow him on Instagram at @DylanColeArt. And you can visit my website, 𝘾𝙤𝙢𝙧𝙚, to see some of my work. I'm also on Instagram. Let me tell you about Pastel Live. If you haven't heard yet, Pastel Live is coming up in September. It's a 3-day online event, or 4 days if you do Essentials Day. And it's packed with great artists, demos, and new techniques. You can learn more about the event and purchase your tickets at pastellive.com. I love doing pastels. I hardly ever do them, but when I do, I think it's so much fun. Fall Color Week is also coming up. Eric is hosting his annual Fall Color Week, but this year it's going to be on the West Coast. He's taking a group of painters to Carmel and Monterey, California, which just sounds perfect. And you don't want to miss that. So go to fallcolorweek.com to sign up and learn more. If you're interested, I have a couple videos out through PaintTube. One is Painting the Night. I love painting moody nighttime cityscapes and really attacking all of the different color and lighting and sort of architectural and historical feelings that one can find. So one video is called Painting the Night. The second video is Glow, creating depth, atmosphere, and vibrant sun. And I really explore aerial perspective and color and painting into a light source, whether it's the sun or electric lights in the city. And you can find those on painttube.tv/ASL. And so, Dylan, thank you so much for joining us today. This has really been great. I've gotten a lot out of it, and I know that everybody else has. So we really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
No, thank you so much. It was a pleasure being on, and yeah, I'm just honored to be part of this. And thank you, Gavin, and your work's incredible.
Hey, thanks a lot, man.
So honored to be here.
This has been so much fun. So thanks, Dylan, and thanks everybody for joining us. Take care, everyone. See you again on Art School Live.